Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Deep Roots Movement. Today, we are continuing our Islam, Slavery, and Salvation series, where we're looking at different aspects of slavery being the Ummah's great sin, and how do we properly assess it and make Tawbah and Tazkiyah and then prevent slavery from ever arising in the world again. So in this episode, we are going to be discussing the Awliya and Malaika amongst us, and how this might relate to enslavement and how it might relate to our personal practice. All right, so in the last episode, we discussed a number of instances where Nabi, where with Nabi Ibrahim and Nabi Lut, alayhum salam, and their interactions with angels and blessings that they personally received for their kindness to these sacred strangers, because in many instances we do not realize who we are entertaining and who we are treating well or treating badly. And then we've got the instance where with Lut and the Malaika, the people of Sodom, they intended to do harm to the Malaika, and so they received a very harsh punishment. They were already on track for punishment, but they potentially had a get out of jail free card if they would have had 10 righteous men amongst them, according to one of the stories that I'd heard. That I'm not sure exactly where this tradition arises, but I am certain that it fits broadly. It fits pretty nicely within the broad prophetic tradition, according to what I've studied. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into this subject matter a little bit more. I was thinking about Rabia. May Allah be pleased with her. And she's known. There are many stories about her and Hassan al-Basri, and that are very interesting to me. Attar likes to tell stories about them, and that's where I first encountered both of them. But I've long been fascinated with the tale of Rabia had been a slave, and she was known for her beauty. She was known for her moral excellence and her purity. Now, I don't know all the details about her relationship with her slave master, and but it's interesting that in one of the tales I heard, her master is wandering through the house at night, and he comes to her door, and there's a light coming from underneath it. Now, why was he going to her door at night? This is interesting. Now, if we know the context of masters and slaves, maybe he was stopping in to pay a visit. Allahu alam. But I'm saying within context, this was quite common, and many masters felt that they had the right to go into the private quarters of their female slaves at any hour. And there was a power dynamic there. So he goes, and there's light coming from under the door. So he thinks perhaps she's up. So he pushes the door open. So he's going into her quarters. I don't know if, in the story, I don't remember him knocking or offering salams. He opens the door. And he sees her there in prayer. And there's a radiant light all, coming off of her. And the whole room is filled with light. And after this, he frees her. Now, and this is very interesting. And after that, she never marries, as far as I know. So she remained unmarried after that, even though she had many suitors, including, according to the legend, according to the stories, Hassan al-Basri. I know that scholars have said that they likely may never have even met, but they're interesting teaching stories. We can learn much from the stories. So so this is the thing. So she never marries after this. Is this because she had been traumatized by her enslavement? Was she subject to violation? We have to consider that this was a very real possibility. He's creeping in at night. He's opening the door without announcing himself. He feels comfortable doing this, and he's not married to her. She's not his sister. She's not his mother. They don't have these. He is her owner. He owns her. We could get into the nuances and whatnot, but just the interesting thing is he frees her right after this. Why did he free her? Is it just because he saw a holy woman? Oh, she's clearly a special woman. Or is it because he realized that maybe she was a Wali and maybe he was scared, maybe he feared for his eternal salvation by having gone and seen that she was a devoted woman? Because many people, they always make it like, oh, he just recognized she was a holy person. No, I think that there's more to it. The fact that it's described as him approaching the door at night and entering into her quarters unannounced and seeing her in prayer. This is quite interesting. So I think that there's a good chance that the story is suggesting that he was scared. I could almost imagine him backing away and going to pray, putting on wudu and immediately drawing into prayer. And realizing in sajda that he needs to free her immediately. And then it's interesting because she does not marry after this. Was she traumatized? Now we go on to the story of Bilal. May Allah be pleased with him. He's, you know, this amazing friend of Allah, this man who had the melodious, beautiful voice, our muadhan, a man who could bring people to tears with his beautiful voice that he spoke from his heart. Now he was an enslaved man, and it's interesting, like, that he had been previously tortured and disrespected and humiliated as a slave for having become a Muslim and practicing Islam, according to what I've heard. And I'm always open to new information, but it's interesting, I do not recall having heard what punishment came upon those who hurt and harmed him. And perhaps you could put that in the comments, because this is a very interesting thing to me. But I would not want to be anyone who had disrespected or tortured Bilal as his slave master. I would not want to be standing in his shoes on Judgment Day, because Allah declares war on those who harm his friends. Can we say with certainty that Bilal was not his friend? Is not Allah's friend? Most people acknowledge, as far as I know, that Rabia is a friend of Allah. Most people acknowledge that Bilal is a friend of Allah. All right, now, so these people, like, they did not recognize that they had a special person with a close relationship to Allah amongst them, that they were enslaving, that they were treating badly. Potentially with the Rabia story, I'm just, we're kind of looking at the broader social context and the outlines of the story in order to infer what's happening. This is part of reading. We're doing a deep reading. Now, let's move on to a couple other brief stories. Let's think about Surah Al-Kahf. In Surah Al-Kahf, we've got the story of Ar-Rasul, Musa alayhi salam, and his assistant, which in the text, in the Quran, as far as I remember, the assistant is not named, but most commentators acknowledge that this is Yusha alayhi salam. And in our tradition, while he is not acknowledged as a prophet within some of the earlier traditions of the people of the book, I'm not familiar with Christians or Jews looking at him as a prophet, but many Muslims do look at him as a Nebi. And he's certainly the successor of Musa as a leader, and he's certainly a Wali. This is pretty certain in my mind. As far as him being a Nebi, I acknowledge that he's a Nebi, and I think that it's interesting that he is with Musa, and they meet this friend of Allah. They meet this very interesting character, at the place where the two seas meet. This is a very, very fascinating story, and we do not know the name of this character in the Quran. However, it's widely acknowledged that he is Khidr alayhi salam, that he is the verdant one, the green one. In other traditions, he is considered to be synonymous and equivalent to, in some cases, Idris, who is Enoch, or Ilyas, or we see instances where he is perhaps Melchizedek. So there are a number of figures that could be associated with him. And this Nebi and this Rasul, they recognize that this is a special figure and that he's a knowledgeable man, and they take benefit from him, but they did not know his status, and they did not understand that he was about to teach them very profound, intense lessons that are very high-level lessons. And actually, these lessons remind me a lot of what you would encounter if you read stories from Mahayana Buddhism and from the Taoist tradition. Very, very similar. So he's like a Taoist sage. He's like a bodhisattva. Some people have even said that he was, perhaps he is the Buddha. This doesn't quite match up to me, but I do see him as potentially what would be called a bodhisattva, or a wisdom being, an enlightened being, deep on the enlightenment path. So these, the Rasul and the Nabi, they do not know who they are with. And, Musa, we remember that he's not particularly patient with this man that he feels is not on the moral, ethical path deep enough. He's got a different understanding of things and different behaviors that don't sit well with Musa at first. But he grows from this experience. He takes tremendous blessing from this journey that he makes, and from the lessons that he has provided. All right, so in a similar, now the thing is with Khidr alayhi salam, forgive my poor Arabic, we have him show up in many Sufi stories. He shows up when people are ripe, when they're on the spiritual path and they are about to go deeper and expand their hearts, or be filled with light, to come into insight. And so he's at these key points, and we have stories where people will receive benefits and blessings. And I'm sure if I was more knowledgeable, and some of you are much more knowledgeable than me, you would be able to tell me that he probably had people treat him badly, and they did not receive the lesson at the time that they would have, or they might have received maybe not a punishment, but perhaps a correction. All right. Now let's move on to a story about Isa alayhi salam. In the biblical texts, we have a story of Isa. Now, Isa is thought to be dead. He's thought to be entombed. And we're not going to go into the details of that as far as from a Muslim perspective at this time, but there's a lesson here that we can take benefit from. So, 2 of his disciples are on the road to Emmaus. Now, Emmaus means a hot spring. And what's interesting is, this is a place in Sham, and it's near a hot spring. Hot springs are typically places utilized historically for healing of the bones, of the body, of skin conditions, a place of relaxation. And so these 2 brothers, they are on their way to, they're on Emmaus Road traveling, and then all of a sudden a stranger joins them, and he's walking with them. And I don't recall if he's a hooded character, but he is a stranger, and they do not recognize him. And they have a conversation with him. They travel quite a distance. At some point, they decide that they're hungry, and they stop at a tavern or an inn, maybe not a tavern, I shouldn't say, but like a roadside restaurant. And because I don't actually believe that I don't actually believe that Isa was a drinker the way that the Bible depicts him in certain instances. But they stop and they're eating, and then the stranger reveals his identity, and it turns out that it's Isa alayhi salam, and he's been teaching them the whole way. And he reveals to them he's alive. This is an interesting event. So and they take blessing, because now they're in their teacher's presence, which is a blessing in and of itself. And they're receiving direct lessons from him. And in hindsight, whatever they were conversing about holds lessons within it, as does his very presence. So we've got these instances now where we know that people are around Malaika, Nebis, Rasuls, and Walis. And each one of those, like where a Wali, a Nebi, a Rasul may not recognize another Wali in an instance. They might not recognize an angel. But in any of these instances, and these are all teaching stories, in any of these instances, there's a potential blessing, or there's a potential correction, or a potential punishment therein. If we consider this in relationship to slavery, because we're making a larger argument that is slavery is the ultimate riba, that slavery is almost guaranteed to hurt or harm Allah's friends. That slavery is eating the wealth of the orphans because people are orphaned and taken away from all of their context and their connections in slavery most of the time. We've also got the instance of, if an enslaved person is mutilated, marked, hurt, or harmed, like cut or tattooed, pierced, that then, which was very common in enslaving traditions, as a mark of ownership, and or mutilated could be considered even taking flesh off of their back, but we could look at it as being flesh off their back in the cattle. Like we are not supposed to hurt or we're not supposed to take flesh off of a living creature for food. And people who are enslaved are a type of cattle. Now you could argue that that's not within the Muslim tradition. That's getting into some, we're playing word games in my mind in this instance, because these people are treated as property worldwide, and people, even if they're saying, well, technically they're not property, they are. So let's consider one more thing. Now, remember the story of Ibrahim praying to Allah to save Sodom if there were 10 righteous men there. Now let's flip it and look at it from a different direction. Think about India again, and Pakistan, South Asia, and how this very wealthy land was regularly being raided by Muslims. Technically, you could say they were expanding territory, but in many instances, it does not appear that they did much expanding. What they did is they pushed in, they raided, they typically went into temple areas, because temples they would hold great wealth. Many of the statues would have gold and jewels, etc. They would have all the dancing girls would be there. They would be bejeweled and wearing silks, beautiful women. There would be, so there would be a nice haul if somebody was engaged in land piracy or sea piracy, perhaps. And you might be a little bit upset by me suggesting that some of the people that were jihadis could have been pirates. But we need to look at the context, because we look at people's fruits. These people were not going in and freeing the land from tyrants and oppressors and ending enslavement, because then they went and they enslaved everybody. Huge, 100,000 people at a time, multiple times, recorded in Muslim and non-Muslim documents. These instances, what I want us to consider is that if we've got 100,000 people, say that Sodom had 100,000 people, or Sodom and Gomorrah had 100,000, maybe it was significantly less, I don't know, but let's imagine this is city size. Many small cities nowadays are 100,000 people. So they capture a small city size worth of people and enslave them. And they are going to include, people who are going to be sexually taken advantage of in many instances. If Allah was going to save Sodom, which is considered a vile, horrible, sinful city, he would have saved it for 10 righteous men. What if there were 10 righteous men and women among that 100,000? Would not Allah punish those who hurt and harmed his friends if they were beating them, if they were disrespecting them, cursing them, throwing them around, humiliating them, stealing their property? Violating them, men, women, children, mutilating them? I would argue that for 10 righteous humans out of 100,000, that we have enough evidence across the broad prophetic tradition to realize that it is very dangerous to enslave people in this instance. And who gets punished? Is it the individual who then takes that woman with his right hand, which is interesting symbolically, because right hand symbolizes mercy and compassion. And we know for a fact, if we study the broader history, that there are many, many instances where people are not behaving with mercy and compassion. Plus, there are power dynamics. There are all kinds of crazy things happening. And we do not want to be defending something that is morally or ethically indefensible based on an ideal and a mistaken notion of what actually is. We do not want to set people up as idols. Just because somebody's a ghazi, a jihadi, doesn't make them a righteous man or woman. Like in women participated in these adventures in some instances and benefited from them. But The point is that who pays for hurting the Wali? Is it the leader who distributed the people? Is it the individual who gets the Wali and hurts them? Is it the community? Is it the scholar or the scholars who are justifying it? So we've got to consider, or is it the broader community? These are important issues for us to consider, and we should consider them very seriously, even if it's potentially a possibility that the Ummah could be punished for this. We need to really, really think about this and think about solutions to our dilemma, because we are facing the potential of worldwide enslavement right now and mass depopulation, mass genocide. If you are awake and aware, then you know exactly what I'm talking about, because this is very real. So that means we need to look, if anytime Allah brings something into our view, that means we need to look at ourselves individually and collectively. We need to take a close look at this. If we want to not be enslaved, we need to make sure that we, in our heart, that we are repenting of any connections we have to enslavement. You know, we don't want to bring people into addiction. We don't want to bring people into sin. We don't want to bring people into difficulty. We want to alleviate all of these things. And I would argue that we certainly don't want to start slavery again and then be like, oh yeah, we're gonna have issues with this movement to enslave the world through genetic patents. Think about this. We should not be among the hypocrites. This is one of my major concerns, is we need to save the Ummah from imminent destruction, and we need to see our hypocrisy and uproot it. Root and stem, people. We are better than this. We have so much potential, and we need to save ourselves from the fire. And there are other issues associated with this, because you're like, well, I didn't personally participate in it. If you're defending it in any way, and if you have intentions in your heart, if you would like to have done these things, if you would like to participate in them in any way and have your own concubine, you know, etc. These are important things that we need to uproot, because we need to overcome our individual nafs and our collective nafs, making Tawbah and Tazkiyah. That's always going to be my mantra. I'm going to repeat that over and over again. Tawbah and Tazkiyah. This is the key. This is the answer to our dilemma. You know, we have to purify ourselves, and we cannot defend the indefensible any longer, people. So you are much loved, deeply appreciated. Until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is your brother Ilyasin, and we are the Deep Roots Movement.